Good, open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 7. I preached that sermon Wednesday night on the explaining away the supernatural, and it actually kick-started some thoughts here. I'm probably going to preach a few more sermons along this line of the supernatural not being explained scientifically, but understanding what God has done. This evening I want us to take a look at Noah's flood, because a lot of people claimed for years that there was no evidence of a massive flood. The simple reason that they claimed this was that they simply didn't look at the evidence available. If you go and look at the redwood forest in California, that which hasn't been burned down, you can still see the watermarks. It's like, no massive flood, huh? Explain that. And a lot of people like to put on their blinders. They like to put on their blindfolds and proclaim that, well, there's no evidence of it because it doesn't fit their narrative. It doesn't fit what they want out there. Don't believe me? Read the news. And in this, a lot of people simply want to discredit the Bible. And in so doing, many people kill their own faith. But if we actually look at what happened, you get into the details. That's the wonderful thing about the Bible. You get into the details and you begin to understand, holy smokes. He explains it step by step. The book of Job is the oldest written book of the Bible. It's not the beginning of the Bible, obviously, hence the word Genesis. But Job, more than likely, lived before Moses. So when Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, Job had already lived and died. And Job fully describes hydroponics in the book of Job, which is something that modern humans did not discover until a couple thousand years ago at the earliest. God's attention to detail does not make it so that science, today's science, can disprove him, but rather it truly does prove him. Understand something. I'm going to say this real quick. The study of science, science as a whole. First, I said on Wednesday, the word science means knowledge. But secondly, science for thousands of years was used not to disprove God, but to factually prove him correct. It was the study of how everything worked out, all your different sciences, to show God's genius. Nowadays, people want to claim that, well, there can't be a God because science says that there's not a God, while regularly discovering that it's the Word of God is absolutely true. ECU, last year, had this massive thing on the temple. For hundreds of years, people claimed that there was no evidence of David or Solomon in the temple, and the reason why is because they literally were looking in the wrong place. If you move about 400 yards to the south, you would find the temple. And so every time you hear of the Dome of the Rock, oh, it's a holy site. Oh, Dome of the Rock, the Muslims and the Jews are fighting over this holy site. Keep in mind, they're fighting over the wrong thing. I'll get into that's another sermon for another time. But people constantly want to try and disprove God. And in their attempts, they accidentally prove him correct. A couple years ago, there was an article that it tried to explain that there was more evidence of the Exodus because radiocarbon dating pinned the eruption of a nearby volcano to the 17th century. And then, BC. Then that eruption would have caused a tsunami in the ocean, which then would have caused the Red Sea to draw back at precisely that location of the Red Sea, and then crash back down on the Egyptian army. This is their argument for trying to prove that the Exodus could not have been a supernatural hand of God, as written in the book of Exodus. But there's a little problem with this theory. First off, did Moses simply get lucky when he stretched his hand out over the Red Sea? Secondly, when was the last time that 3 million people ever managed to walk across that much land in the span of about 2 hours? We can barely get people to walk, period, for 2 hours. Anywhere, much less across an entire sea from one continent to another. And their animals, don't forget them, the little kids. And so in this, they're trying to explain it away. But this is the type of thing that I'm going to talk about tonight as we examine Noah and the flood. We're going to use their scientific evidence to show how supernatural the hand of God actually is. And my hope with this is that it builds some faith. Because I want us, as we grow as Christians, we have to begin to move beyond simply reading the words of the Bible. There has to be a point in time where we begin to study the words of the Bible. Words have meaning. God, I know plenty of people, I read the Bible backward and forward. Congratulations. I've read the encyclopedia. I don't know what every word means. So in this, there needs to be a desire to push in a little deeper, to study things out. And the hope is that it builds our faith. Because if we're going to experience what God has for us, there has to be much more than just a basic surface level faith. We have to get in deeper. Me, I'm a bit of a geek. I like science. It's fascinating to me. But these are one of those things where I dig in and it's mind-boggling. Oh, that's how God did it. And He left evidence of how He did it. So let us read Genesis chapter 7, verses 11 through 24. It says, "In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were open. The rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them, entered the ark, they and every beast after its kind, all cattle after their kind, every creeping thing that creeps on the earth after its kind, every bird after its kind, every bird of every sort. And they went into the ark to Noah, 2 by 2, of all flesh in which is the breath of life. So those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded, had commanded them, and the Lord shut him in. Now the flood was on the earth 40 days. The waters increased and lifted up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and greatly increased on the earth, and the ark moved about on the surface of the waters. The waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills under the whole heavens were covered. The waters prevailed 15 cubits upward, and the mountains were covered, and all flesh that died moved on the earth, birds and cattle and beasts, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every man, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life, all that was on the dry land died. So He destroyed all living things which were on the face of the ground, both man and cattle, creeping thing and bird of the air. They were destroyed from the earth. Only Noah and those who were with him in the ark remained alive. And the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. So first I want us to take a look here at the boat. This ark was created of gopher wood and was large enough to hold all of the animals of every kind and Noah's family. And now think about this. First, the first question most people ask is, how did they fit 2 types of every animal on the boat, male and female? The answer is simple. The word "in every kind." Scientific terms, Noah and his sons gathered 2 of every genus, not of every species. So think about that. He didn't break down the Arabian horse and the black horse and the stallion. He got 2 horses. All right, y'all belong to the same genus, 2 horses. He found 2 mosquitoes, only 2, not every different type of mosquito. Y'all are mosquitoes, y'all get on the boat. 2 types of the genus of birds. When you begin to think about this in science, I know we're kind of going back to like middle school science class here, but when you begin to break down how all the species of the earth are and everything, genus is big. Species is little. So in this, it's a lot easier to fit 2 of every kind when you're dealing with broad terms, not little terms. But doesn't that there suddenly make the concept of the ark a lot more sense? Oh, he's only grabbing 2 of every genus. all of a sudden it makes what seemed to be an impossibility possible. That's still a lot of animals. Don't get it twisted. All right? That's still a lot of animals. It still was packed. But in this, God didn't have Noah create a boat bigger than the earth. Because that's the argument about, in order for that to happen, the boat would have had to be the size. No, stop. Words, they mean things. Read them. Study them. So, because of this, Noah and his sons were able to house all such creatures on the ark. Then understand that they were on this ark for 371 days, a full year and 6 days. And out of that, they had to be able to survive with food and water afloat, as floodwaters were 15 cubits above the mountaintops. And so in this boat had to be quite sturdy, had to be quite sizable. You ever have to pack enough food for a year? I'm like, shoot, I can barely afford enough groceries for a week. But in this, they had enough for a year. And they were floating 15 cubits above the mountaintops. My bigger question is not how did they survive in the food. The food makes sense. You're 15 feet above the highest mountaintop. It's cold. Mount Everest is freezing all the time. They were able to freeze their food. I'm curious how they were able to breathe. That's my bigger question. Because you climb that high, all of a sudden, air gets real thin. People die up Mount Everest every year. I don't have an answer for that. But in this, the preservation for food for a year actually makes quite a bit of sense. Hey, we need to flash freeze this. Just stick it outside. All right. 50,000 feet in the air. Nailed it. But in this, it had to be strong enough to withstand tsunamis and hurricane-force winds as well. You say, well, how do we know that? I'm going to get to that in a minute. Then, the boat also had to be capable of surviving a grounding. It had to be able to run ashore. It landed on Mount Ararat, which is in modern-day Turkey. And so it had to be able to withstand the actual beating that it was going to take upon the grounding and the resting place there. And then, you say, well, how do we know that this boat even existed? Well, in the 1980s, a man by the name of Ron Wyatt was able to get into Turkey. He snuck in and take a look at Mount Ararat. And the reason why I say he snuck in is because, by and large, it is illegal to be anywhere near that area, and they will generally have you arrested. This is not the only nation in the world that does this. If you go to Saudi Arabia, there is a place called Al-Jaz, which is known as the Mountain of Moses. And this mountain is blackened, as if set on fire. And the reason why is because that is actual Mount Sinai. Everyone who tells you that Mount Sinai is in Egypt clearly did not read the part in the Bible where it says they left Egypt and went to Mount Sinai. It's very difficult to go to Mount Sinai and leave Egypt if Mount Sinai is in Egypt. And so in this, there are a couple places in the world during World War II, Saudi Arabia legitimately asked U.S. pilots not to fly over the mountain or to take pictures because they wanted to deny Christ. Why would they do that? Well, both countries I just mentioned are Muslim nations. They don't want anything to prove Christ right because then they lose their claim to everything because they're a bunch of usurpers, but that's another story for another time. And so in this, he got into Mount Ararat, and I don't have pictures this time, but some of what he saw, there's a boat that thousands of years later still survives in its structure. So there, you can look these up. There are these photos that show the outline of the boat still intact. It looks like hilltops on the mountain. It's been grassed over and everything else. But it fits the dimensions, and it's exactly in the spot that God said it should be. There have been studies performed on the area. And what stands out is the fact that the metallurgy or the metalwork of the ark appears to be technologically beyond what it should be. I have a theory as to why they seem to be so technologically advanced for a boat. that was about 4,000 BC. First, Noah and his children were direct offspring of Adam, Eve, and the sons and daughters of man, the sons of God. Genesis chapter 6, verse 2 says, "Now it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose." So I'm going to mention this. I don't have time to get into all the rest of the theories. But this is what is known as the Nephilim. And so in this, the sons of God came down to help populate the earth. If these are in fact individuals who came down from heaven, I think they might be just maybe, possibly, a little bit smarter than we are. I'm not sure, but if I were a direct descendant of God, and I left heaven to come down here, I might know a thing or two about technology. If I were able to reside in a place that's perfect, I might be able to just maybe make a boat that's better than what I can do right now. Which, by the way, if it's up to me, y'all are up a creek. And so because of the supernatural hand at work here, we honestly have no idea how technologically advanced pre-flood civilization was. We don't know their skill or their ability. In Genesis chapter 11, the Bible tells us that at the Tower of Babel, God states that man could do whatever they put their minds to when they're united. And this included reaching the heavens. To this day, we don't have a building tall enough to reach the heavens. The highest building in the Western Hemisphere is 1,776 feet tall. It's in New York City. To reach the heavens, you have to go a few 100,000 feet higher. Just a little bit. And that's just to get to the bottom of this level of the atmosphere. That doesn't get into the ionosphere and all that good fun stuff. So we have no idea how technologically capable these individuals were. We assume that they're a bunch of, nomadic, sheepskin wearing tribes people who are like cavemen. But if God sent them from heaven directly to populate earth, and you read of the glory of heaven in the book of Revelation, they're probably smarter than us. Just a thought. You say, well, how can you say that? Who here has ever seen a CV-22, the Osprey, the helicopter that's got the rotating blades? What if I told you that was actually designed by Leonardo da Vinci in the 1500s? He didn't have the technology capable of making it, but he designed it. And then we built them and crashed them for about 25 years until we managed to get them airworthy enough to fly on a regular basis, except for last week. Another one crashed last week in California. But just in this idea, maybe, just maybe, God has some people on the planet that are a little bit smarter than we would like to think. Secondly is the flood itself. This is where you really start to get into the supernatural. Our text tells us that the fountains of the great deep were broken up. This tells us two things. First, it didn't just rain 40,000 feet of water in 40 days. But rather, God moved the very foundations of the earth. And so when you read the account of creation of earth, there are no indications of volcanoes or tectonic plates, as the earth was perfect and good. However, our text tells us that there was a breaking up of the deep, and this would indicate massive earthquakes. If it was perfect and whole, and then there was a breaking up of the deep, that would be an earthquake. And thus it created tectonic plates and the release of supermassive amounts of pressure. And so what happened is the earth's crust would begin to break apart, allowing for magma from the core to rise up and push water upward, as well as building pressure up into mountain ranges that would have to be released through the explosive nature of volcanic eruptions, all of which could cause tsunamis, which are great flooding walls of water, that would bring water upon the land. So going back again to 6th grade science class, you all saw the whole thing of Pangea and all that nonsense. There's a little bit of element of truth. I don't know that the earth was all one supercontinent. I have not found evidence of that in the Bible. But the idea that there were no tectonic plates and that the earth was one solid piece, there was a breaking up of the great deep. It's the first mention in the Bible of any such action. There are several points of evidence to back this up. The first is the largest dinosaur boneyard in the world is found in the United States. It's actually near Wyoming. It's that region of the United States that no one ever visits, and there's like 12 people in the whole area. But the scientific evidence shows that millions of grown dinosaurs, not any of their babies, were fleeing northward and resulted and drowned as a result. So if you actually track this dinosaur graveyard, the largest one in the world is in Wyoming, but you can actually start it to trek all the way as far south as Arizona. And this is where you find a lot of smaller dinosaur bones. Baby dinosaurs were dying as they were flooding. Larger dinosaurs were trying to run, and the largest dinosaur graveyard in the world is the result of them having nowhere else to run. They drowned to death. And you say, well, that's interesting. There's more to that in a second. The second piece of evidence to back up this claim are 3 different points on the earth. The first one being the Marianas Trench. The Great Deep was broken up, and thus it created the deepest point in the world. The Marianas Trench is a large trench in the Pacific Ocean, and it is literally the deepest part of the earth that we know of. In fact, there's no light at the bottom, and as far as I know, man has never been able to successfully send anything far enough down to find the bottom because it gets crushed by the water pressure. Based off of sonar, they believe they know how far down it is, but they cannot prove that. They just have the reflection of sound. Then in the Atlantic, you have the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which is essentially a constant state of volcanoes creating more than 10,000 miles of mountain ranges below the ocean, from Iceland to below the southern tip of Africa. And so this is where the tallest mountain in the world actually is. Everyone talks about Mount Everest. Mount Everest is the tallest mountain in the world above ground. The tallest mountain in the world is actually in the Atlantic Ridge. It starts on the ocean floor and comes up. Then, the third point would be the Ring of Fire, which is, it runs along the Eurasian and Indian continental plates across the Pacific, down to where you see the massive volcanoes and high earthquake activities. And so, it essentially is the west coast of the United States, up through Alaska, Russia, down to China, Japan, Taiwan, down into the Polynesian Islands, almost as far south as Australia, and making its loop back around. And it essentially runs the entire border of the Pacific Ocean. And so all of these things happening, because this was the creation of what we know today in modern Earth. All of this happened simultaneously. Think about that. You always hear about California going to get hit with the big one. Or you heard about the Malaysian tsunami that killed was almost 250,000 people on the day after Christmas of 2004. All of that happened simultaneously. Which leads, of course, for increased flooding and increased pressure. And that leads to sedimentary layers that also prove the flood. There's no argument that the flood couldn't have happened in Noah's time there's an argument, that the flood couldn't have happened in Noah's time because there's no sedimentary evidence of that time period. So essentially they say, well, there's nothing in the dirt that shows that this time period existed, which is partially true. There's no verifiable sedimentary evidence in the Earth's crust to prove Noah's time because the Earth's crust was recycled during that time frame, meaning the layer of the Earth that we currently sit on, which is the crust. All of that was recycled in the breaking up of the deep, the creating of the tectonic plates, the creating of the mountain ranges. Because, by the way, there's no mentions of mountains until this point in the Bible. It talks about some of the hills. There's no mentions of mountains. And so all of this is happening, At the same time, the crust was recycled, but there are 6 sedimentary layers that do provide evidence of a massive flood during the time of Noah in rapid succession. And so I don't have time to break down each layer, but the easiest way to explain this is that coal and oil are both forms of sedimentary evidence of the flood. Oil is believed to be dinosaur remains that had so much pressure it turned into a liquid. And most of the Earth's oil comes from the same geographical locations as dinosaur graveyards. And the reason why this is important is because when you hear the term fossil fuels, it's actually, whether they admit it or not, an acknowledgement of God's move with the flood. Because if dinosaur bones, if they're right, and dinosaur bones are being pressurized is what created oil, the only thing that created all of that pressure was water. I don't know if you know this, but dinosaur bones are fossils, right? We all went through that in school. So when they talk about fossil fuel, the only thing that created enough pressure was about 50,000 feet worth of water. Interesting. Just a thought. Secondly, coal comes from plant fossilization. So coal is also a fossil fuel. If every plant on the earth today were to pass away and be fossilized, we would only have about 3% of the earth's total coal. Think about that. However, the largest coal beds are found in the same sedimentary layers that were crushed flat by massive amounts of water pressure. So in this, what happened is God flooded the earth, the perfect earth, and created coal. So every time that you light up the grill, like on the 4th of July, you're lighting a plant from Noah's time. Think about that. That's kind of cool. Huh. So what does all of this mean? Well, not only was this the first time it rained on the earth, but it was the first time we ever see plate tectonics mentioned, and it perfectly explains all of the quote-unquote natural wonders of the earth that don't have an explanation in modern science. So what we have to then begin to realize is this shows us the supernatural hand of God to make these things come to pass. Literally, God shook all of the earth with his hands to bring these things about. I know I got super sciencey. It's like science class. You're like, hey man, I didn't need a science lecture. There's a reason for this. Because we talk about our faith in God. We believe in a God we can't see. Well, how do you know he exists? This is how. Because the signs of God are everywhere. This is why in Romans when it says, even if no one were alive, the rocks would cry out and proclaim his glory. They do. You're going to light a barbecue on fire and you're going to see the work of God in your grill. You're going to put gas. I just put $86 worth of gas in my car. Look at all them dead dinosaurs. How did that happen? The things we take for granted are the result of God moving. I just got to put some gas in the car. I'm going to fire up the grill. I'm going to climb a mountain. I'm going to find a boat in Turkey. I'm going to go to a 6th grade science class and explain tectonics and earthquakes and volcanoes. I'm going to make a paper mache volcano. I can kind of be like God a little bit. I'm going to make stuff blow up. Look at that. And finally, God leaves us with the symbol of the rainbow. And this rainbow, of course, has been hijacked by Antichrist individuals. But it is also the first time a rainbow is ever mentioned. And it's a reminder of God's covenant to mankind. Not just that he won't destroy the earth via the flood again, but it is a symbol of his grace. Because it is here that he started over with mankind, just like he started over with us when we received salvation. The rainbow is so much more than an idea that we're not going to drown to death as a species. But as much as it is, because of this rainbow, I start again. And people want to hijack it. But these are the signs of the supernatural. If we try to explain them away as mere science, we would deny the power of God. And really, we'd weaken the power of our own testimony. Think about how amazing this is. And what it means for your own walk with God. This is why it's so important for us as Christians to dig in to the details of the Word of God. I have one on Moses and Mount Sinai. I have a sermon as well on Solomon and the amount of money he received. Things that people want to deny, explain away. I mentioned Moses earlier, the Exodus. People want to deny the reality of it. But you know what's kind of funny about Moses and the Exodus? 2013, the nation of Egypt formally asked Israel for the money back that they plundered out of Egypt on the Exodus. How do you deny God while then also going, well, just in case your God is real, can we have all that money back? It's the same reason why Turkey doesn't want people on Mount Ararat. It's the same reason why Saudi Arabia don't want people on Al-Jaws, Mount Sinai. If you go to Mount Sinai today in Saudi Arabia, you'll be arrested for trying to prospect gold. You know why you'll be arrested for trying to prospect gold? Because if you read the account, if you get into the details of the children of Israel when they created the golden calf, Moses ground the gold to dust and poured it into the river, and then he made the children of Israel drink it. The reason they'll get you for prospecting gold is because there's still gold from the calf that's there. But they'll also tell you, your God doesn't exist. Either this word is completely true, or it's completely a lie. There is no in between. And when you dig into the details, you find more proof the Word of God being true. This is how you know the thing that you're praying for is possible. This is how you know that long-lost ache of your heart can be healed. This is how you know the very fabric of your foundation, that you believed in a man who died on the cross, who on the third day rose, is real. And I talked about Jesus on the cross already. I did that on Wednesday, getting into all that happened there. Get into the details. Seek it out for yourself. Read and study, because all that can happen is a growing of your faith. And I don't know about you, but I could use a little bit of an enlarged faith. It is only by faith that we can please God. Get into the Word of God and see these things for yourselves, and you will be amazed at little minute details. I end with this thought regarding Noah's flood. I mentioned Methuselah. He's 969 years old when he died. The name Methuselah means God's grace. Methuselah is the oldest man to ever live. Meaning God's grace is the oldest man to ever live. The year that Noah turned 600 and God closed the door to the ark is the same year Methuselah died. So when God's grace died, he brought about judgment. The little details in the Bible. Let's bow our heads this evening. Just for a moment of time. We are currently living in a time of God's grace. He died.